Okay, so we're here today we've all been reading. I think, James, you've actually finished the book, right?
I went through parts of it. I
Okay,
started kind
okay,
of at the end, and then
okay.
I got caught up a little bit here, but I just ran through the like chapter 4 was the first time I come across it, so I'm not that well versed in the beginning part of the book.
Okay, no
Okay.
problem. Well, that's good then. So we'll all be pretty much on the same page. I often
Mhm.
skip ahead in books too to what I'm
Yeah,
interested in. Like
yeah,
when I got the new Peterson book, I just immediately it's like chapter 8, that's the one I want to read, and I
yeah,
just skip straight there.
right,
So
yeah.
yeah, I totally get that. So anyway, we're gonna discuss the first 4 chapters of Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth by D.E. Harding. And does anyone like have anything they'd like to say to start? Kind of get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
want to I want to read that Jacob Boehme quote, but I can't because I'm on my iPad and I have it on here. Maybe I'll do it another time when I'm more organized. I tried to download Zoom onto my Mac, but I wasn't fast enough. So it's all right.
Yeah,
Do you know
I think
the? Go for it, James.
no, I was just gonna say that that preface was pretty succinct by C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
and kind of situating the book, and then I think it kind of throws you a curveball the first few chapters. Like you really kind of got to get inside of it, but once you do, it seems pretty intuitive. That's kind of the feeling I got.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question: Is do you think does anyone here expect Paul to actually circle back around to talking about this again, or you think it's just like, do you think he got scared off of it?
It's a good question.
Well, honestly, reading the book, I think it would really interest him, and I would be surprised if he cracked it open that he didn't finish reading it.
Hmm.
So that's what I kept imagining him reading some of this stuff
It
while
might
I
take
was.
him a while to process it too, but or maybe we'll hear from
It would be
Yeah,
good. Love it.
I think
Paul.
if you start at the end, like I sometimes certain books, I'll read through some chapters, and I started looking at at the end the New Angelology, and that last section of the book was really a good read. You didn't even have to read the first part, so maybe kind of doing that.
right.
I found that very helpful actually in understanding the first part.
Yeah, I know like one thing that Michael had asked me is he was like trying to track down if like he was trying to play like a little of a 6 degrees of separation to figure out whether there had been any influence by Owen Barfield on Harding. And like the third chapter in particular, it's like
Yes.
it sounds like Barfield could have written that chapter almost. So
Mm-hmm.
um
I
but I haven't found any evidence that there was any direct. I mean, obviously Lewis wrote the preface, but there
Hmm.
doesn't seem to be any direct connection there that I could find.
Yeah,
I
that
would be
was an
surprised
interesting
if
chapter.
Lewis didn't tell Barfield about it. Like,
Mhm.
or I don't even know, was Barfield? Yeah, Barfield was living there.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
so Sherry, let me ask you first. What's your primary impression from the first 4 chapters about like what's your big takeaway? Like, why do you think this is important? Why do you think this is worth talking about?
Okay. Um, well, I mean, I because how do I put this? This is really hard to do because I mean, I personally, I can only ever relate things to me personally, but I have always had the intuition that the more you understand yourself, the deeper you go into yourself, the more you know God, right? Because that is where, I mean, we often hear the term that, that mankind is like the mediator between heaven and earth. And that's what this book is telling me, is that we're moving, we're bringing, that's where the rubber hits the road, if you want to put it in really
Right.
common terms, right? It's right here in us. And that's why I wanted to quote Jacob Boehme, because he says that mankind is the microcosm, the hieroglyphic of eternity and time, right?
Mm.
And when I first read that, it resonated with me, but I didn't know why it resonated with me. It just did, and I loved it,
That
right?
really comes out in the 4th chapter of this book too. Like that, so that would have been really, that definitely would have tied in, because that's
Yeah.
precisely exactly what he's saying, is that as you go through, you know, as you go through the layers,
Yeah.
that he's almost actually saying that each layer itself is like a microcosm of the layer or of the layer above it in
Oh
reality.
yeah. Yeah.
So,
Like
well, I don't
there's
think he's not almost saying he is saying that. He's saying that yeah. So,
I mean, I honestly didn't know what to expect when I opened the book up. I was a little
right,
afraid. Like I told you that, right? I was like,
right,
I don't know if I want to go
right.
there.
Is he being literal? Is he serious? Does he really believe he has no head?
Right. Yeah.
That's why I was afraid. I was actually afraid that like I actually I linked Paul the Wikipedia article like summarizing Harding, and that's why I was afraid that I was afraid I might have accidentally scared him off of it, because if he just goes off of that Wikipedia summary, it just sounds weird because you don't actually hear it presented, and it's like, wait, how does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Once you start reading the book, it's like, oh, this makes
Yeah.
so many
Yeah.
sense. Like
And
especially the parts about how like the like you the need to like for the layer of reality above something to impact and draw it toward it. That's
yeah.
clear. I mean, and about what you were saying earlier, it's like, I mean, that's more than an intuition, right? It's like, I just think that Christians sometimes don't take the kingdom of God is within you
Mhm.
seriously.
Right.
It's
Right.
like, we were already told. You don't have to
Yeah.
rely on your intuition, Sherry. You've been
That's
straight up told that's the answer,
Mhm.
it's
right?
true. It's true.
So the revelation backs up the intuition.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I see, I mean, I've got lots of scribbles in my pages here, but let me just see. There's one in particular. Um, where is that? Here. So in the second chapter, it's on page 26, under illusions of grandeur. He says, here then are the makings of a new portrait of myself. It is not what I had reckoned for, but it is drawn from the life. But is it perhaps too flattering? Am I not in danger of thinking too highly of myself? I actually really appreciate those kinds of statements in this book.
Right. Yes, yes, for sure.
I really do.
Because it distinguishes it so clearly from the kind of like turning into the self that so often happens in like pop spirituality and psychology.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yes, he's telling you to look toward trying to seek out what your identity truly is, but he takes it in a totally different direction than those other things. So, but continue reading. Yes,
Yeah.
to affirm that. Yes.
Just on that note too, whenever I tried to articulate what I meant by knowing yourself and then knowing God, that's what I was confronted with, was that pop form of spirituality where people were like, no, you just have to die to yourself. You have to, you know, and I wasn't good enough obviously at explaining what I meant. And I was just constantly confronted with those kinds of ideas that, no, you have to reject that, right? You don't look inside, like it's filthy rags, it's all these things, right? You have to transcend yourself, like, and if there's always this idea of leaving yourself behind, like that self has no dignity or worth, you know. And I just couldn't get the words together to say what I was trying
Right.
to say.
Harding's showing the same thing, but he's showing it as an awareness, right? Because
Yeah,
Harding is also ends up saying like, when you get to the absolute center,
there's nothing there.
it turns into nothing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which I have
But
such a hard time with. But let me just read this
okay,
quick.
go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so he says, the danger may be averted by 4 considerations. First, that my base, which I can never cut loose from, is my merely human phase. Second, that if I am more than human, I am also much less. Third, that it is only by sinking myself in my object that I rise to its status. And fourth, that in myself, I am nothing but a reception center for others. And my life is the life they live in me. You know, when I read that, I was like, well, that's Christianity in a nutshell.
That's right. And
In a nutshell.
And he's used simple, aware observation, and he doesn't even like say it in a way that's like, he makes it in a way that it's actually accessible. Like you could come to Harding, which I'm really curious about. Has anyone listened to any of what Sam Harris has to say about Harding? Because Sam Harris apparently likes Harding,
Oh,
which is
really?
very, very queer to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I did listen to a little bit, but not enough substance, to be honest.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I have not. I wasn't aware that he was aware of Harding, so that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think he also has had like Ryan Long, who is like the main contemporary like proponent of Harding's legacy. He's had a long form interview with Ryan Long too. So
yeah,
yeah. But I think
I
guess it's
I don't know much about Harding.
I suppose it's because Harding avoids specifically theistic language, even though he's clearly even though that's clearly what he's talking about. So he's talking in he's talking in Christian philosophical language without explicitly referencing it as such.
Yeah.
So
he does so more in the end, and I like how he takes like a practical approach. Like, you know, you have to die to yourself, so he literally decapitates himself. He decapitates the self, right, where you have no head. And what kind of stood out to me is this idea of you're in the world but not of it.
That's right.
So you're like standing apart from it, and you're observing. Like in the dream space, right? You're disembodied, but you see your body. You might see it from the top. You might be, you know, you can literally become other objects. So it's more of this fluidity. And a lot of the different concepts in there, I think were interesting. He says that, you know, everything is kind of real. They're all illusions. Some of them are just more kind of structured illusions. You know. It's interesting to.
But he says it's all imagination. It's just
imagination.
Which is again, that's part of the part that like that was part of the part that resonated with Barfield to me too, which is why I can see why Michael was asking that question. It's like, because it almost seems like he would have although he may be getting it from one of Barfield's influences, like he could be getting it from Coleridge rather than and he seems to be very well read, so I'm sure he's read Coleridge. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he just died recently, right, Harding? Is that right?
Yeah, 2007. He lived to be like 97 years old.
Wow.
So he's born in 1909 and died in 2007. So,
yeah, I think something that came to mind was this like radical phenomenology or phenomenological realism,
right?
Where it's like all he's doing is just, you know, instead of like, you know, the Matrix where it says, you know, what is love? Just random firings, patterns of firings in the brain, you know, neurons firing together. The whole world is, you know, neurons firing. And it's like, well, the world's not reduced to those neurons firing. There is neurons firing that's happening there. But why would you reduce this rich experience to that and then say that your brain specifically makes a copy of the world? Like it, you know, that makes sense until you like look at it from this kind of phenomenological perspective, and it just makes the world real again. That's
right, and it makes it not flat, right? Because like philosophically, we've come like since the later Middle Ages to like just view being as a single flattened category. It's just like, you know, there is just being. And what Harding is doing here, just through the simple practice of awareness, is he's leading you back toward the classical and early medieval understanding of not a flat being, but a layered hierarchical structure of being that can be experienced at those different layers and is participated in both horizontally and vertically. In fact, it even uses the horizontal and vertical language in chapter 4.
Yeah.
Which absolutely echoes like the Christian Neoplatonic tradition.
Yeah.
Talking about horizontal and vertical participation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, chapter 4, I just read it about an hour ago, and I really enjoyed it. How he went through the different, the fractal levels from, the atom to the molecule to the cell, to the organs, and then the organism, and then kind of he kind of leaves it there. He doesn't get into the galactic or solar aspects in that chapter, but
Right.
all those levels are real. And when he talks about the different animals, the millions of animals that
Make you.
are within our bodies, right? And then it's
Right.
that skin. We live on this, kind of, we live this skin existence when there's this
Right.
whole world inside of us of fighting and loving and eating and excreting and building and destroying. It's like this whole city kingdom lives inside of you. And if you just fractally, bring that to the higher levels, it's okay. It's fractals all the way up and down. Real
Right.
flat.
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I love how he like basically he uses the analogy of like this cellular world of like all these tiny little animals who have no awareness that they constitute a larger body as a wonderful analogy of
Mhm.
our lack of awareness of the layer above us.
Yeah.
Well,
I've,
I like he did it. He had a metaphor in there of how the was it the nucleus has this membrane around it that keeps it separate, right?
mhm.
Just
Yeah.
as we have the custom of shaking hands, and we also have that, right? We have this personal space around us that keeps us, even though we're in close contact with our whole society, right? As the cells are. I mean,
Yeah.
even to that level,
Yeah.
I
Oh yeah, but the way he takes and that's the other thing is like you can see like in what he's saying, you can see like why it's important like for Christians to take community building seriously because
Mm.
he's showing you how these structures like have like tremendous impact. It's like uh, they that we can't we absolutely need to exist within them.
yeah.
And um yeah. So
And if things are incoherent at one level, it affects all the levels, right? So
right.
it's like, and that was a kind of a good insight. I think it's like if there's a problem in the geosphere, right, it's felt in the biosphere, right? Like the idea of cancer in the body is a microcosm of a cancer, kind of in a broader sense. So it's like there's this coherence that it needs to happen at all levels for there to be kind of this appropriate mediation of heaven and earth. And but we live
Yes.
in this fallen state, right? So that appropriate mediation is no longer um, appropriately cohering, and that's, Christ came to kind of fix that. I think of this idea of this idea that he had in there of the cells, you know, uh, communicating with each other. I've had this idea with like a hydrogen and oxygen molecule talking with each other, saying, "Yeah, have you heard this? I've heard from the other molecules that there's this thing called water." And the oxygen molecule is like, "Oh, that's a myth. There's no such thing as water," right? So it's like the same thing with the cells. Like the cell's going to be like, talks to the other cell. I've heard that there's this Nathaniel guy. There's this God called Nathaniel, and the other cells, come on, that's just what grandpa cells tell baby cells
Yeah,
in order to
right.
get them to
Yes,
sleep,
exactly.
right?
Yes, right.
It's
Yeah.
like the same thing.
Yes.
Why
Yeah.
wouldn't it make sense, even in terms of Occam's razor, to think that we are part of a broader body, and that body can be, as it says in the scriptures, it could be one of two ways in a sense.
A
Well,
body of
he says in here about that. He says, and if we do not know them, they do not exist. For knowledge of this level is a sharing in its ignorance. The
Mhm.
vagueness of our knowing is the vagueness of our being.
Mhm.
I really
yeah.
liked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was lots of those that moment too, reading that portion too, and I wrote a little bit, some notes, like I think in chapter 2, where this whole idea and philosophy of the things in themselves, you can never get out. This Kantian idea, you can't get into the things in themselves. This is the exact inverse of it. Is you were always interacting with the things in themselves, right? We're always interacting with reality as it is at all levels, right? So this idea, there's this fundamental kernel at things you can't get at. Well, that kernel is empty, like our kernel is empty, but that emptiness isn't nothingness.
Right, but
It
it's
is
important.
being.
So,
Yeah.
but Kant and Plato were when they before him when they were talking about understanding things in themselves, they were trying to do that through language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what Harding is doing, he's like, no, your awareness
Mm-hmm.
of the thing, like your knowledge of things in themselves, is rooted in your awareness, and that you can trust, and which is completely the opposite of the spirit of the scientific age of modernity, which begins by radically doubting every perception that we have and
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
calling it into question, so and trusting abstractions more than our primary awareness of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is really important, like, just to talk to, this is really important, like, um to talk about in terms of Barfield for a second. Like, that's kind of like Barfield is very clear on the fact that, like, original participation is never fully went away, right? That there are echoes of it there, and you know where the echoes of that are?
Yeah.
It's in your primary awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have to, well, let's say, I like to talk about waterfalls in this context. When you go out into nature and you look at a beautiful waterfall, the ancients' description of that as being the goddess of the waterfall is closer to what it actually is than if you were to scientifically and abstractly describe the workings of a waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because that goddess of the waterfall sensation, that's a primary awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
That that
kitty
that
cat.
that, that gets into the description of, when George MacDonald says that, the nature is man turned inside out, right? That that we take what we're seeing and use it as a wardrobe to clothe our own thoughts about what's going on inside of us. That's a really, those two, what you just said about Barfield, that
Right.
fits really well in there.
I also
And what
love also love how he, like, sees the entire mind body complex as just like a giant sense system. Like, the entire thing encompasses our awareness. So
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's
this
not
is,
like, it's not just through our eyes, or or
no,
just through any one of the senses, or just through our thought. It's like the whole thing in combination. Like, basically saying we are essentially like a, a an awareness complex that has
Mm-hmm.
composed of mind and body both.
yeah, it's a very holistic look at well, everything. I mean, I'm only in chapter 4, but I'm assuming that it's going to go further out, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so, and yeah, one of the things I found kind of interesting was that he also holds up the argument that there is no personhood without relationship,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
and I
There's
thought
nothing.
that was
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
really good.
I know. Sure. I mean, sure. Obviously, you've heard me say that many times. So obviously, that's something that resonated with me, because I'm
Yeah,
on
Yeah.
about that all the time. I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble, is like, especially in our age, is like we don't understand that God is both substance and relation. He's a relational substance. And if
Mm-hmm.
we forget either of those things,
Yeah.
then
Well,
we get into trouble.
it's love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor is yourself.
Right.
I think, and
exactly.
a similar question is, who is the observer here? Like, he takes
Yeah,
you through this trip of the observer going in. Who's observing? I keep asking my question, who's observing? And it helps me, embody, or not embody, but, inhabit that headlessness that he's talking about. Like, who's observing? When you get down to the kernel of it, science has been looking at, smaller and smaller things, looking to find out what reality is. And then when you get to the kernel of it, there's nothing there. It's not that there's nothing there. It's just, it's not,
it
it's
it's
not
not
a,
anything. It's not anything without relationship.
yeah. And he says
Right.
that
Yeah,
about at every level, like the atoms come together, and through relationship, they form molecules. And those molecules come together, and literally their centers come together, and they form a higher being called, water, hydrogen and oxygen, through their relationship, right, form water. So a higher level of being is realized through love, through the coming together of two disparate parts at a lower level.
One might even say communion.
I was just
Absolutely.
going to say that. Yeah.
That's it.
Whoa.
Communion.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it's interesting to think about theosis in that sense. So what is the water, if we're hydrogen and oxygen molecules, what is water for us? And I think that's the kingdom of heaven, right? That's this idea of the next level that it's hard to think about. But kind of you can become
it's the thing beyond us we're being drawn toward.
Yeah. Singularity from a scientific perspective, but
I actually know. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question though, because I keep getting this idea that this is remember I was asking about the word, now I'm going to forget it. Okay, let me just say my thought. I keep getting this idea that things are rushing toward each other, like that that it's not so much, like he keeps using this idea, even with the cells, that you only know yourself through the other, right? And so it's this, what does he call that? Projection and what?
Reflection, I think.
Reflection.
Right?
Yeah, projection, reflection. Yeah.
Right. So it's these things have to, like his description of the mirror was really good.
It's
these things have to come together in order for anything to emerge, right, from it, to be born from it. And I thought that was, because I have this, I'm the intuition girl. I don't have any philosophy. When you guys start talking about Kant, I'm just like staring at my window. but
intuition's better.
I have this intuition about things rushing toward each other, and it's kind of like at an infinite speed, right? And where the thing that they never stop, actually, like they're meeting, but they're also rushing at the same time, and that's the only way I can describe it. And when I read this, that's what I'm seeing that in there. I'm
almost like lovers running into each other's arms
constantly.
Which is kind of like just to bring that into philosophy, that's why Plato, I think, ultimately talks about Eros as being the force that draws things toward the good, which is the form of all forms. And that's why ultimately in John's gospel, God is love, because it is that relational force that is drawing all things
right
toward one another, in participation with one another, and horizontally toward participation with one another, and vertically and toward participation with God.
Right. And it's not gratuitous. It's you aren't anything until you do it. You know what I'm saying? Like you just you're driven in a sense, right? Because in order to know, you have to come together, right?
Because that's ultimately where you're defined. That's where the answer to the question that he begins with, the what am I question, that's where you find the answer. Because what does he find at the center? When he goes all the way into the center, into the core, what is there? Nothing. So in actually order to answer his question, he has to turn it back outside. And then what happens? He's very clear about this, is that the object and the subject interpenetrate one another.
Yes.
And give each other the gift of their identity.
Knowing.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to, is nested identities, and that things actually exist. And that's why the incarnation, I think, is important, because it's not, we are all one, but we're not just one, right? Is we're realized in the reflection of the other that we realize through our relationship with them. It's identities all the way down, not turtles.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, there's a good example. Someone asked me one time, who do you think you would be if you didn't marry your husband? And I think when they asked me that question, they were thinking about, would you be a farmer? Would you be what kind of job would you have? Where would you live? But when they asked me that question, I was like, I can't answer that.
Right.
Everything that I am is because of my husband. Right. Well, I am nothing. I wouldn't even be having this conversation with you.
Well,
if I hadn't married my husband.
I hadn't met James before today, and I would say that there is inarguably some alteration in what makes up me by
Yes.
virtue of having interacted with James today.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That whatever I was before having met James and interacted with James, I'm altered by that. And he is
Mhm.
altered by his interaction with me, having met me before. So
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
um
That's metanoia, right? That's transformation.
yes.
Yeah. It's a real thing. It's not a
Yes.
kind of an ideal. It is. We can't help but be transformed by the other. Uh, you know, um, and more encounters with the other, in with integrity, I think nurtures that process. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Even negative interactions are
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
right? Like everything that you bump up against, it's iron sharpening iron, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like it's constantly whittling down and refining and honing, and yeah, like there's just no way that you, it's like a pinball machine.
Mhm.
That's a good analogy. I don't
Well, I
know
think,
if even you guys know what that is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Hey
the double.
Sherry, I turn 50 on Western Easter. Since you're both Orthodox,
Yeah.
I'll specify.
Pinball's game is this game you can play on your phone. There's an app. It's called Pinball. That's
Oh no.
that's all I know of it. No, but double click a little bit on the question of who would you be if you didn't meet your husband. That's an unanswerable question, because if you take the idea of marriage, you become one flesh under God. You taking Harding's perspective, right? You are becoming one, not
Yeah.
in like some kind of abstract sense. Is you're becoming one, and your family is your body growing, and the relationships you have is now, it's not just you. You and your husband come together, you form one, right? And now it's like a cell. You're becoming more. It's that horizontal and vertical growth
Yeah.
that makes you more, differentiates and integrates at the same time.
That's the other
Yeah.
thing he does that reminds me of Barfield, is that he's like very much, he's like, he takes the way that we use language, like metaphorically, and all of our personifications and anthropomorphizations. He's like, no, there's a reason we talk like this.
Mhm.
That it
Yeah.
actually reflects reality more than a lot of our abstractions do. Like,
Yeah, that, or we're nothing talking about nothing, like C.S.
right,
Lewis
yeah, that's
says.
the choice. Yeah, right, yes, exactly.
And
That
there
is the
are groups of
choice.
people. There are people that are comfortable with that. The whole nihilist perspective.
I don't
But,
think there are. I think the
yeah.
people that think that they're comfortable with it, I don't think that I don't think they've come to grips with what it really means. I think that they have some sort of maybe like Fight Club level cheerful nihilism,
Hmm.
you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
And I think that they haven't really followed the false narrative of freedom that politics so often offers to us. It's like they haven't followed that to its logical conclusion. They
Hmm.
haven't seen where it really leads yet. And if they did, I mean, I would say that I think maybe Nietzsche was the closest to an honest nihilist, but even he is delusionary.
Well, he went mad. If you take
Right.
that logic, if you play it out, you will either go psychotic, you'll go mad, you'll go bonkers. That's the end. That's the end game there, and you're not
So
aware of it until you're there.
Right.
here's a question then. Is that arriving at the center where there's nothing? Is
Hmm.
that being in that place?
I think I think that it can be like it can go one of two directions. It's like either you can go I think in some ways all of us have to like get to that we have to get to that point of like understanding what the alternative is, right? Of confronting, because I would argue that your choice ultimately is between Christ or nothing, and that nothing else is coherent. Like it's
Mhm.
either like and the philosophical narrative about nothing has the advantage of being logically coherent, right? So
Hmm.
it's a logical possibility. Like if logic is your only metric, it makes sense on logical terms.
Hmm.
Okay,
But
so
forces it actually requires you to ignore everything else and your own actual desires. So it can be useful if it if it scares you into considering that there must be some other alternative.
I mean, would it necessitate cutting yourself off from others if that's really what you thought? Because that would be the only way to be in that place of nothingness. Like, I'm just thinking about Nietzsche in this case. Why did he go mad? Did he go mad because he found himself to be entirely alone in the center of nothingness, cut off from everyone, although he's in a world? Like, in his mind, to think like that, you must be, in a sense, you must be cut off from everyone else.
Well, you can be a sociopath. I mean, that's one possible outcome, right? You can just care nothing about raw power and fulfilling your own desires.
Okay.
And not care about what impact those have on others.
It'll eventually burn itself out. Like you talked about two sides of a cell or like a battery, right? If you keep going too fast, it'll burn you'll short circuit, you literally, and you can't, it's like this idea of projection reflection ad infinitum. Like, it starts going and you can't really hold on to your identity there anymore. Your identity gets lost in it. You literally kind of eat yourself from within, and you can come to nothing as nothing. And I think that kind of short circuits you, or you can come to nothing as everything. The realization that, this nothing is, I'm everything.
But it's almost, it's like, but it's actually, I think ultimately it's like a black hole, right? So yes, it's a nothing, but like a black hole, it's a nothing that wants to suck everything into itself and devour.
Yeah.
Okay. So would we call it, here's another, this is running in the back of my mind. Would this be evil?
Yes. I think that's big, that is an understanding of evil that actually makes sense with the classical, like, ontological understanding of evil as having no positive being, as just being like a devouring emptiness and lack.
That is black hole's evil.
And because it's I don't know if literally, but at least metaphorically, it can be used. The function of a black hole can be used to represent, like, it's a good analogy to understand evil as a lack, and also as a devouring hunger that can never be satiated, because it is lack. It's always empty. So no matter how much you've put in there, no matter how much there's no filling it. Because it is emptiness. It is hunger itself. That's all it is.
Yeah,
and it would be a state of non-being. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yes, it would be a state of non-being, because it. Yeah.
It's not in relationship to anything. It can't be.
Right. You can only understand it by it's it's defined by absence, just like a hole, like, I mean, what if a hole in the ground is like, it's not really right. It's just like the dirt that isn't there.
Well, it's a void.
Empty space.
What if we try to? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I've heard that description of evil, a negation or an emptiness or a lack or whatever. But what if we try to define it as that emptiness, that void, that lack, as actually being not in relationship to anything?
It couldn't be, because it would devour anything before it could come into relationship with it.
Right. Okay.
Well, the Eastern like Buddhism and even Taoism, but more Buddhism, talks about moksha, or this enlightenment is realizing that you're nothing, no thing, in a sense, and it's like, I don't think that's not evil in a sense, but there is this idea of that, the void at the kernel, like, psychoanalysis tells us at the center of the psyche is a void that this lack, in terms of Freud, in terms that we're trying to fill with our desires, and everything is trying to fill this void. Well, in terms of like Hegel, to the negation of a negation, we're just trying to fill a void that we're not aware is there. And I think that is, in a sense, an evil thing, right? To say that you're the kernel that makes you is this void that is trying to fill itself, but it's also what Harding's talking about the emptiness. So it's like,
yes,
so it's like the same thing, but again, evil twists what's true. right?
Mhm.
You know, so it's they're both the same,
But what Harding says is fundamentally Christian and differs from the sort of like that sort of like Eastern non-dualistic approach. I think
Mhm,
Harding is a non-dualist, and I'm a non-dualist too. I mean, there's Christianity is also, I mean, Christianity that's felt theologically well formed is also non-dualist. But here's the difference. The difference is that identity is still maintained through relation.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the difference. And
Right.
I'm real. And David Bentley Hart was the one who like made that clear to me.
Yeah,
mhm,
me too.
Like, so it's like, because I struggled with like trying to wrap my head around non-duality for a long time, and it's like I could see like the appeal of like Eastern sort of ideas of non-duality, but I just had this like this intuition that there was just something not right there.
mhm,
And that's what it is like not is its lack of understanding that relationality is is what actually defines us.
mhm. So would you say that cells, like, let's go back to the analogy of the cell talking to the other cell, like, hey, I believe in non-dualism, right? But when it's saying that, it's talking about your body, right? So it's both and, right? Because you can't have non-dualism without you know, it can't be just non-dual, right? I'm a non-dualist too, but it's like there has to be an identity. Ultimately, there's one identity, right, with non-dualism, but there
Right.
are distinct identities that reflect that one identity
The
at all levels.
non-identical repetitions of that one identity is how I would put it.
I'll say it again. You cut out a little bit there.
Oh, sorry. I would non-identical repetitions of that one identity
Yeah,
is how I would put it. And
yeah.
not only that, non-identical repetitions that are intended to exist in an economy of love and asymmetrical gift exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes
Which
sense.
is
So
what
yeah.
the cells are doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That in your body, that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're involved in that, and I mean, you can say that they're actually grounded in being, like the human being, right? The cells in your body are in being, like that's where they have their that in that's in whom they move and have their being, right? Is in the ground of being, the human being. This
Mm-hmm.
is
Right.
just on the
On
cellular
the cellular
level,
level, right?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my son, my 6-year-old, asked me yesterday. Actually, it's so funny. Like, listen to the babes, right? He says, "Dad, are we just the atoms in God's body?" So
Yeah.
because he's learning about atoms and molecules, I'm like,
Did
I
you
think
ask
so.
him if he was reading Harding's book?
No, I said I think so, buddy. I think so. Something like that. You know, it's funny. You know,
Wow.
they have the they
Mhm.
have the wisdom that we condition out of them. The wonder
Yeah,
that he's trying to bring back, Harding's trying to bring back, is in a child. It's in a six-year
Yeah.
old.
it
It's
is.
there. You know,
Yeah.
it's so be a 6-year-old in a sense. You know, and later in the book, he goes, like, not to skip ahead, but this idea of he's not against science, and he
No, not at all.
recapitulates science, and he says it's necessary to take what we've learned, right, and reverse it, right? So it's like you take this understanding where we've come to, we've gone from the beautiful to the good to the true, which is science, the investigation of truths, and just reverse it and go now from the true to the good to the beautiful and reobtain the beatific vision in a sense. So it's
Mhm.
this, Jonathan Peugeot talks about this inversion, right? We need the flip to happen, where
Yeah.
the scientist has now realized that you can't take the observer out of it. So now they have to reckon with that, right? And this whole idea of consciousness has come into the fold now. So it's a matter of time before, we're already there. There's not really any materialists anymore. Like, is Sam Harris a materialist? Is he? With his
Yeah.
meditation and
When
psychedelics and no self.
when panpsychism is taken seriously, are we talking about materialism in any comprehensible
It's a cop
sense
out.
anymore?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a cop out, man. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean by panpsychism?
Right.
What is the psychism that's pan?
Right.
Let's dig in there,
That sounds
this,
like, to me, panpsychism just sounds like everything participating God down
yeah, right.
down to the tiniest level of a
Well,
particle.
it's not God. It's, and then you get into this equivocation. Oh, let's go with the universe. Does that make you feel better? Oh, yes, actually, it's the universe. Okay.
Yeah.
The universe is looking out for you. People say it,
Yeah.
with a straight face. God's ridiculous, but the universe is looking out for you. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
And
I
then
used to
there's
say that
also
too.
then there's also the use of the word emergence in
Mhm.
science as well, right? Like that this keeps popping up all the
Yeah.
time. And I'm grateful for it, because at least they can say that, well, I mean, this is their way of saying they don't know,
Mhm.
Right.
they use
Yeah.
emergence.
Yeah.
These are being honest.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Right.
So I don't really have a fully articulated thought here, so I'm gonna try to see if either of you have anything to say to this. But I was trying to think. So Harding calls his whole thing like the headless way, and I was trying to think. It's like I couldn't quite make what the connection is, but it's like, is there a connection between Harding talking about his ideas as the headless way, and our understanding that Christ is the head of the body? We are the body, but Christ is the
Oh,
head. So are we
Mhm.
properly headless? Is that is there a connection between those things or not?
Hmm.
What do you guys? Or maybe I'm just crazy. I don't
well,
know.
it was just
No.
obvious to me. I
Oh,
mean,
okay, so you got that right
Yeah.
away.
totally
Yeah.
obvious to me. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just like, oh, that's, I've even got little notes in here, the body of Christ.
Oh, okay. So I'm not the only one. At least okay. So at least I don't know how to articulate that exactly, but at least I'm not the only one who had that
Mhm.
instinct to
Actually,
think
maybe
of
I
it
should
that
try to
way.
find that. I'm going to see what's where I wrote that in,
Okay.
because I could read it just for anybody watching. Oh, my hair now.
I think he was writing this in the 50s, where there was this attack on the transcendent,
Yeah.
right? So the transcendent,
Oh,
any
yeah.
ideas of heaven, right? So he's saying we're heaven, like heaven is the head, right? And it's saying we're not just immanent, we're transcendent as well, and
Yeah.
we've just been focused on the immanent. We've been looking down for so long, breaking everything into pieces. I think he's just saying, look up, just look
Yeah,
up again.
that's exactly
you
what
know?
he's saying. Yeah.
Look back up.
And look down.
Yeah,
He's like,
exactly.
he's saying we're in the middle. He actually says we're in the middle.
Yeah.
Like, and we can look down and we can look up.
Yeah. I like how he uses
Well,
infrahuman and superhuman.
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
We're in this kind of middle earth,
Yeah.
like we're in
Yeah.
this middle
Yeah.
way, and we can observe both ways. It's
Yes.
it's fascinating.
he actually talks about the headless martyrs right at the beginning of the book.
Yes, he does. He
Yeah.
sure does. Yeah, and he
I
talks
thought-
about like old ghost stories about like headless ghosts and all that stuff too. Yeah. The
Oh,
headless
okay. So
martyrs. And,
my little note about the body of Christ was in that piece that I read it before. So,
Okay.
like I said, I have a couple notes here. I'll just see if they make any sense. When he says first that my base, which I can never cut loose from, is my merely human phase, I wrote Adam. Okay.
okay.
Second, that if I am more than human, I am also much less fall. Because that's what the fall was, trying to be more than human, right?
Mm.
And third, that it is only by sinking myself in my object that I rise to its status. And fourth, that in myself, I'm nothing but a reception center for others, body of Christ filling the hierarchy. Those are my notes, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I like that the part about filling yourself with your object is the only way you rise to your status. I mean, it's like that's like eyes on God right there. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's so.
Imagine if our politics was reflected that,
Yeah.
I think it makes the whole French Revolution of the guillotine gives it a whole nother flavor when you think about this headlessness. It's like they literally cut our heads, right? So now he's kind of re-saying, hey, you're headless now, but what's been cut is not just your physical head that we've done. It was actually a metaphysical cut as well. We've lost our head. It's a lot of different kind of trajectories to explore it.
When he talked about the headless martyrs, there's a legend I used to live in Switzerland, James,
Mhm.
and in Zurich, there's a place on the Limmat, which is the river that flows through there, that talks about these two saints, Felix and Regula, and they were drowned and beheaded in the Limmat by Zwingli because they were Anabaptists.
Oh, interesting.
Christians being nice to Christians.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But the legend goes that they got up and picked up their heads and walked away.
Oh,
Which is
interesting.
really interesting. Yeah. And when he was talking about that, it kind of hit home, these headless martyrs, because it's a very well-known story in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think another thing, and I got to pop off here and put my son to bed, but
this
idea of headless, of the infinite, right? So this nothingness that is what we find at the center of things is the infinite, right? And if you think of the 10 commandments, the first commandment is have no, don't worship a God other than me, make no ideals, right? So you need to worship the highest high, right? If you're connected to the head, if you're connected to anything else, right, you're headless. You know what I'm saying? Like the head is the infinite, right? In order to appropriately structure or perceive the world appropriately, you have to be connected to the infinite, which is
which is why he's saying the head is not here. This is not where the head is.
That's
the
what
head
he's
is
saying.
Exactly. The head is vertically transcendent, like beyond where you can even see. That's where the head is.
And he says you're the sun, you're the galaxy, you're intergalactic, so it's the head is heaven. The whole book is called The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. So it's connecting the real head, Christ with the body. Yeah. It's fascinating.
All right, that's a great note to end on, since you got to get out of here and my little dog is freaking out because my wife just left.
Thank you guys. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you very much. Oh, I enjoyed it.